out of nowhere, flying saucer mystery is with us.
Airline and Air Force pilots.
The Air Force itself has officially admitted that flying saucers exist.
Is there another civilization somewhere in space? Are we under surveillance by an intelligence that has revealed itself to us only?
Hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked.
Is life everywhere the same as us? Or are we just one example of a vast array of possible kinds of biochemistry?
The paradigm of science is not equipped to handle this.
Identified flying objects that you believe.
Believing in them is a matter of communicating with them. Very strange and unusual.
Economic reasons, political reasons, military reasons. It's not a scientific issue.
It's a puzzle. It's a puzzle, but it's a puzzle that's worth exploring.
Our Earth has been observed by alien civilizations for at least the past 50 years. Throughout our history, each age in our development is characterized by an ignorance about the scope of possibilities not yet understood, that future generations may look back on with a sympathetic smile of condescension.
To us, in the 20th century Earth, this might seem magical, but I tell people to maintain some sense, if they can, please ask them, to maintain some sense of humility. Because if you were to show this video camera, or a hologram, or a laser to someone only 300 Earth years ago, it would appear to be a magic. It would be considered supernatural.
Such is the case with UFOs. To us, they represent intangible illusions between fantasy and reality. "400 years ago, the Earth was believed to be the physical center of the universe. Nicholas Copernicus, and later Galileo, challenged that belief, suggesting that the sun was the center. And still 200 years would pass before William Herschel's stellar observations, and later Edwin Hubble's classification of galaxies, relegated our sun to a single, insignificant star among billions. Only then do we begin to imagine our place in an incomprehensibly vast cosmos."
I think there is a certain twilight zone of phenomena that, if confirmed, would really overthrow the entire materialistic worldview.
Let me just say, as a professor of philosophy who writes professional articles and knows how to do academic research, there is in this field some incredibly good literature, very sophisticated material.
There's just a wealth of information, and I would challenge anybody to disprove that. You see, anyone who says there's no evidence to study has not looked. It's as simple as that.
The possibility of a purely psychological explanation is ruled out. The discs do not behave in accordance with physical laws, but as though they were weightless, and show signs of intelligent guidance, such as would suggest quasi-human pilots. The officials in possession of authoritative information should not hesitate to enlighten the public as speedily and thoroughly as possible. Dr. Carl Gustav Jung, 1954.
It's just more than UFO crashes and alien bodies. I mean, there's a whole science here. To quote Dr. Hynek, he said, the UFOs, whatever they represent a science of the 21st century. Right now, we don't have the technology or the know-how to explain what they are and how they do it.
Crop circle formations continue to appear on several continents.
This is the beginning, a doorway opening to a new science, a new physics, a new energy, a new world. I think very much that's where this is all moving.
Thousands of credible sightings continue to persist.
The subject of UFOs is part of the subject matter of some courses that I teach.
Oh, good.
So it's got academic credibility in the community.
Yeah.
At least as far as I'm concerned, the evidence is really overwhelming that extraterrestrials are here. It's hard, after you see 5 weeks of that material, it's really hard not to have that opinion, I think.
Abduction accounts from around the world, beginning in the 60s with the Hill case, recall exact similarities and also continue to persist.
You know, the problem here is in a way, it's the messenger. Here I am, a historian at Temple University, or Bud's an artist at Bud Hopkins, and there's Mike Swords, who's at Western Michigan University, and various people saying these things, that this might be happening. As, you know, well, the fact that we are saying it automatically means it can't be happening, because the message is far too big for the messenger. If this were truly happening, we would not be the messengers. The President of the United States, or Secretary General of the United Nations, they would be the messengers, and that would mean it wouldn't be happening. So no matter how much we say it, and no matter how much abductees say it, that automatically means it can't be happening.
The UFO phenomenon has been a part of our lives for the past 50 years. With it comes the possibility that we may finally discover who we are and what we humans might accomplish in a vast cosmos, endowed with intelligence.
What I always state about this phenomenon is that taken together, the collection of all of the photographs, the videotapes, the accounts that I've been mentioning, the ground traces, the physical marks on people's bodies, the descriptions of the events in the craft, and et cetera, the sightings, all of that constitutes an extraordinary phenomenon. And I think it is indisputable that an extraordinary phenomenon demands an extraordinary investigation. Sociological reasons, threat, denial, psychological reasons, economic reasons, political reasons, military reasons. It's not a scientific issue.
So there's a lot that scientific method, as we know, can do to study this phenomenon. But what it cannot do is try to explain the meaning of it or the purpose of it. This must be left to another type of reflection.
For the last few years, it's been thinking a lot more about what's happening on this planet and seeing that the evolution of human consciousness has reached a crisis point, which goes along with the time when we have the potential to step out and start exploring the stars. That's the challenge where we're really facing at the moment. We've become masters of the material world, and technology is really, technology is tools, and we've got the most incredible tools now to do almost anything we want in the material world, including stepping off this planet into space. But I think what we've got to become is equal masters of our minds. And that's the next frontier, is inner space. We've got to stop being victims of our fears and all the stuff that's inside us. We've got to actually become masters of ourselves, move beyond this egocentric phase, so that we can then become the true masters of our technology and use that with wisdom for the good of ourselves, the good of the planet, the good of the cosmos.
The stories piqued my curiosity, and I began first collecting news clips from the local papers, which published little short news items on them, occasionally. And then I started looking for pictures, and I clipped a few of them out of newspapers and magazines until I ran into somebody that had an actual print. And I went to a lot of trouble negotiating with him to get a copy of that. But once I had one original print, it was easy enough to trade that to the next man and in return for his. And then I had 2 to trade, and then 4 to trade, and the collection grew rapidly when I had something somebody else wanted. And I just kept trading the same pictures over and over to others who had different pictures, and eventually everything that was out there came my direction, and I put it in the file. So at the present time, I think there's over 4,000 pictures in the files, and they're all different pictures, but it's purged, pretty well purged. I don't have any in there that I know are fakes or have strong reason to believe are fakes.
Colonel Stevens began his career in the Air Force as a young fighter pilot during World War II in the Pacific. An expert in the field of aircraft technology, After the war, he was stationed with the Foreign Technology Division of the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Wright Field. During his 24-year career, Colonel Stevens played a role in the negotiations which led to the Japanese surrender, and served as a consultant to the Bolivian Air Force in its structural formation. Retired from service in 1963, Wendell Stevens has since earned an international reputation as one of the world's foremost UFO investigators, having published well over 20 books on the subject. His interest in the phenomenon was established in 1947 when he was transferred to Alaska and placed in charge of B-29 crews flying missions over the Arctic.
When I got to Alaska, I found that my additional duty, I was assigned there as an assistant base operations officer, completely out of my specialty. My specialty was technical engineering. As an assistant base operations officer, and my additional duty was supervising a team of civilian technicians from Wright Field, where I had just come out of, that were installing special equipment aboard the B-29s that were flying their target profiles are over all the B-29 crews had their targets in Russia, and they carried them home with them. They had them with them all the time so they could get on an airplane in 5 minutes and have the targets with them. They were required to fly a profile mission on their targets over the Arctic and Arctic airspace and their Arctic conditions at least once, and every crew was rotated through Alaska to do this. My team was installing special equipment to look for anomalous aerial phenomena, is what the Russians were calling it. We were calling them flying saucers. We were looking for surges in the electrical system. We installed surge detectors in every system on the B-29. There's 5 or 6 different electrical systems. We installed magnetic detectors in the lines. We installed cameras in positions that didn't have, all the gun positions on the B-29 already had 60-millimeter cameras in them. But we installed other cameras that looked forward and looked aft. We had handheld cameras. We had even 35-millimeter movie cameras and a big 70-millimeter movie camera that could be used. And they also had a Fairchild 8x10 camera that was a big thing like this. It took a picture on an 8-inch by 10-inch negative. So all of that stuff was carried aboard the airplane, and after the operation people briefed the crews, then after the weather people briefed the crews, then the Coast and Geodetic Survey people briefed the crews, then I had to brief the crews on the equipment that my team had put aboard and how to use it and what it was for. And if they got anything when they came back, they were debriefed in the same order, and if they had experienced anything, they'd be turned over to me last, and they'd tell me what they experienced one by one. And while they were doing that, my crews would be downloading the cartridges, cassettes, and film cans, and all of those things we had. And if they had had an experience of any kind that was unique and important, the data would all be boxed in a metal box looked like a little footlocker, about that long and about that wide and about that high. And that was padlocked on a lieutenant's wrist and flown out to Washington every night on a courier. And he had to go to a certain office that had a key to take it off to unlock him and turn him loose. And they kept the box and sent it back on the next courier flight. We had several of those, and this was how the data was transmitted to Washington. We never had no way to read it. We couldn't develop that. We could, but they weren't allowed to develop the film, to read the tapes, to look at the movie camera film. Nothing.
So you were hearing stories.
Well, we'd hear the stories that resulted from the action that was on the film, but we never got to see any of it. So there were some real interesting stories about seeing objects sitting on the water, submerge and disappear as the B-29 came along. Other times they'd take off and fly away. Some once was seen to come to the surface and emerge and fly away. They saw them take off from the ice surface of the ice pack up there, the snowfield. And these are big objects, 100 feet in diameter, that have no ground support equipment. You know, to get a B-29 airborne in the Arctic in the wintertime, it takes a field of equipment around the B-29 as big as the B-29. Well, here were bigger craft sitting on the snow up there with no ground support equipment that take off and fly away at high speed. And that puzzled our senior leaders a good deal, because they wanted to believe that it was a Russian innovation that had come out of the war, that they didn't want to accept the idea that it might be extraterrestrial. In fact, I was almost alone in that idea. Most of the time, I tell my boss that I thought they were were extraterrestrial beings, and he'd laugh and he'd say, they can't come here from there and go back. Why would they come? Because cosmic distances are too vast. You know, it's going to take you 50 years to get someplace and 50 years to get home. Who's going? Among the first photographs taken on the old tin-type cameras was one at Drobak, Norway, showing a photographer with the big bellows over his head and a big camera on a tripod was taking a scene of the harbor, an afternoon scene of the harbor, early evening, and he saw an object moving from right to left across the field of view, snapped a picture of it, and got perhaps the first photograph of a UFO at close range in Earth's atmosphere in the sky here. And that picture was taken on the 27th of July of 1907 at Drobak, Norway. The next picture of importance, and probably the second or third picture of UFOs taken, was photographed by Mr. Alfredo Fandricas, a weekly news magazine reporter for a paper in Fatima, in Portugal. And you know, the apparitions began in September, in August, 13th of August, 13th of September, and the 13th of October. In the first apparition, the children saw the sun swooping overhead, and an apparition appeared, and to 3 shepherd children, they reported that to their priest. The priest went with them the next time. The apparition happened, only the 4 people saw it. They got the word that it was going to happen a third time on the 13th of October. Now, all this is predicted in advance. And by the time of the third anticipated apparition on the 13th of October, there were 12,000 people gathered in the fields there. When the object appeared, it was brilliant, came through saw a spot, it emerged through the underside of the clouds. It was rotating on a vertical axis, began to swoop over the heads of the crowd like this, making low passes back and forth over the crowd. Alfredo Fandricas got 2 pictures with his camera of the object in the sky. We have one of them here. It shows up as a brilliant ball of light below the clouds. It's a tin type, so it's not the sharpest picture of all. Then the next pictures of consequence were the pictures taken during the Japanese invasion of China and their Manchurian operation. They used aircraft, and objects appeared over the flight line of the Japanese bombers preparing for missions. They appeared following the bomber formations in flight. They appeared in the sky above formations. They even passed through formations, much like the Foo Fighters of modern history, modern war history, except they were something else then. And it was during that time, during the Manchurian occupation, that a Chinese or a Japanese general in the occupation forces was walking down the street in Tianjin, China, and his attention was drawn to an object in the sky because the street photographer, one of those with the old bellows camera, had it set up, and people started pointing and shouting and pointing to the object in the sky. Rickshaws stopped, crowds stopped, people pointed. The tin-type cameraman aimed his camera and took one picture of the object coming down the street. The Japanese general went over and bought it and took it back to Japan. And that's the photograph made in 1942 at Tianjin, China, in the middle, full day, daylight. The next one of any serious importance was one that was made over Los Angeles on the 24th, the night of the 24th to 25th of February 1942. And this was after our war with Japan had started, and we had our cities in blackout at the time. Los Angeles was blacked out every night. San Francisco, San Diego, the whole west coast of the United States. And at early in the morning, like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, disc-shaped objects appeared over the city. And the anti-aircraft batteries turned on the searchlights. The objects passed back and forth through the searchlights, some dozen objects in the sky. They started anti-aircraft battery started firing on them, and they fired, golly, they fired 1,430 rounds, anti-aircraft rounds of ammunition. Didn't hit a thing that night. They killed a few people. The falling metal from the anti-aircraft shells killed people, dogs, set houses afire, did a lot of damage, but didn't hurt any, didn't bring down any alien craft. The next one of serious importance, again, was before, well, it was after Kenneth Arnold described flying saucers. Yeah, that was in 1949. But the next photo event of interest happened on the 17th of March in 1950 at Farmington, New Mexico, when on that day, Mr. Walter Rogel, managing editor of the Farmington Times, published news on the front page of his paper, "Huge saucer armada jolts Farmington." Now what happened on that day, the town's population of about 5,000 people then, looked up and saw spaceships, circular, disc-shaped, metallic disc-shaped craft with domes on the top, passing over their city. They were changing position within the formation like a flock of bees or birds. They did not maintain a regular established formation. It was just a large gaggle of objects that flew over. Hundreds of them flew over for almost 2 hours, and the same thing happened the following day. One picture escaped collection by the military people that went there and canvassed the houses. They took all the pictures, took cameras, but somebody had in town, left town after taking the photographs and took one to Durango, Colorado, where he turned it into the Durango paper, and Durango published this one photograph. Shows about 7 or 8 of the objects in the sky, 5 of them in a loose formation at lower level and 4 or 5 at higher levels beyond it. A bird watcher walking in the woods on the 23rd of April 1950 was crashing through the underbrush, and he emerged into a clear area not far from Redbud, Illinois, facing the southwest. He came into a clearing from the south side, and as he stepped into the open area, he saw a large object hovering just over the scrub bushes there. Now, this was about 30 or 40 feet in diameter, and it was less than 100 feet high. It was below the tops of the trees. And as he stepped into the clearing there, it started to move, slowly at first, and then faster and faster. He had time to open his reflex camera, where you look in the top, and they're hard to sight in because the scene moves the opposite direction once you move the camera. And he got it open and got one picture, and by the time he could roll the film and get set up again, it had moved so far away he was afraid he wouldn't get it. He snapped the picture. He got a little dark spot in the sky, but it was not very definitive. It was just a dark smudge leaving. The first picture was a good, sharp, clear picture. And he turned it over to the local newspaper, and it was published on the paper. And a few days later, he was contacted by a newsboy who was throwing papers that time of day down the road in a rural area. And the newsboy said that he saw the object coming from the direction of the woods, heading down the highway at about 4 times, 5 times the speed of an airplane. And he looked up at it and saw it, and down the road a little ways, he came on a man and his wife working on the roof repairing it, and he said, "Did you see the thing that just went over?" And they said yes, they had watched it also. So there were other observers that corroborated Dean Morgan's story, and they came out in news reports the following day. So that was an interesting sighting because it represented a type seen rather close up and photographed within 100, 150 feet, 200 feet of the camera. The next one that got any real attention occurred on 11th of May of 1952 at McMinnville, Oregon, at about 7:30 in the early evening of 11 May 1952. Farmer Paul Trent was in the kitchen of his home when he heard his wife, who called to him from the backyard to come out and see the strange object that was approaching. And he immediately ran for his folding camera and dashed outside to meet her. There against the low overcast sky, he saw a circular dome disc with the a tower on top of the dome, a raised cupola. It was moving fairly slow. He had plenty of time to frame it. He snapped the first picture, and then he had to move to his right to snap the second picture. There was no flame or efflux of any kind visible, no sound. It was completely silent. His wife didn't hear any sounds either. The pictures he took on the 11th of May, and he didn't report them until the 12th of June, when he had his pictures developed and back, and he showed them to a friend, Frank Wortman, who suggested they take him to the newspaper, and they took him to the Richmond, California Independent, where they looked at them, tested them, and published them for the first time. So now that it's 2 months after the pictures were taken before the information got out. But they have become a classic in the lore of UFOlogy, I guess if you want to call it now. And they've been verified by a number of researchers.
My hypothesis is that these people who are driving these UFOs, or at least the people who designed them, have a technology that's more advanced than ours. I mean, I think that's obvious, that they're more advanced than our technology. Their technology is so advanced that they have figured out a way to artificially warp space-time the way a black hole does, only without all the gravitational effects that rip things apart into their constituent atoms. So that they can actually manipulate. They have some sort of a generator in here so that they can actually produce this field around their craft like a little bubble, a little private universe that they carry around with them. So that they can actually step out of normal space-time into their own private universe and then step back into it at other coordinates. So if that's possible, then they can not only come from all these distant places, but they can also come from parallel universes that coexist with ours and we're not able to see because they're on a different vibrational level or whatever. They can even come, probably, from our own past or our own future. Because as the quantum physicists are telling us now, the past, present, and future are not separate. Our idea of the stream of time is only an artifact of our consciousness. It is our consciousness that's traveling. It isn't that things are happening cause and effect in a linear fashion. It is our consciousness that's doing that. So the past and future actually exist simultaneously with us, and if you're able to warp space-time, you can travel to and from them. Time is not linear. In fact, it doesn't exist. It's just a concept that we use to describe aspects of space-time, and it's an artifact of our consciousness. So this warping of space-time, I think, can explain a great many things about the UFOs.
Some remarkable UFO photographs from the early 1950s were taken by George Adamski through his 6-inch telescope near Mount Palomar, California. In many respects, Mr. Adamski can be considered a pioneer in this field, also claiming to have been in contact with the occupants of the craft.
I consider myself extremely fortunate because really, from a very young age, I had the opportunity to be in an environment where this type of information, this field of UFOs, was really in an amazing time. I mean, the news was covering it as much as they possibly could. Scientists were exploring. We were coming in the space program. So space was on everyone's mind. And during those 63 to 65, which we were involved with Mr. Adamski personally during those times, we really had an opportunity, I really had an opportunity to see some of these crafts exceedingly close. And these are impressions that never leave my thinking because they were so deeply rooted. And to go to these lectures in which you had literally lines of scientists and military officials sitting there and people listening intently on the information that was exchanged and given, it was a very dynamic time in this field, which certainly has changed in the last 20 years. My father had numerous sightings And due to these sightings, he got in contact with many different agencies of the government and investigated heavily into others who had reports of UFO encounters and taken pictures of these type of craft. And because of this investigation, he got in contact with Mr. George Adamski, who was in many respects a pioneer in this field already back into the late 40s and early 50s. I've been taking a large number of telescopic pictures and had motion picture footage of these crafts, and even had many controversial contacts during these times. And this is really the basis of how I became involved through my lifetime, through my father, and through Mr. George Adamski. George Adamski was originally a student and involved with philosophical teaching. And it was due to his study of philosophy that led him to the conclusions that life and the principles of nature and life around us were not by any means a manifestation of only the environment around us. Basically that creation and life was universal. And it was this recognition that led him to investigate through telescopic means, looking out into space and at the moon, to see if he could find evidence of this expression of life. And he was able to, through lunar photography, take some of the very first pictures of spacecraft orbiting the moon and traveling in the Earth's atmosphere already in the late 1940s. Historically, the first analysis, I would say, began with Leonard Cramp, who did orthographic projections on the Adamski pictures. He did comparison analysis on the Adamski scout craft with the Coniston pictures taken by two young teenagers in England several years after he took his photographs, and then also with a Brazilian shot that was taken in late 1954. And based on this orthographic analysis, Dr. Cramp came up with the dimensions and the exact sign and signature of these type of craft, finding them by that technology in the 50s to be authentic. Since that time, Adamski's pictures have gone through biometric radiation tests. MGM Studios did an analysis on the film. They've gone through each decade of technology's analysis, and they have been always found to be authentic and to be some of the best pictures ever taken. And I think one of their strong points was that they are taken 40 years ago, long before the computer technology that we have today, which certainly can composite any type of picture that we wish to. In this particular shot, we have a picture of a cigar-shaped craft with its propulsion system fully operational, so it looks like it's enveloped in a luminescent shield of fluctuating light. And it's located between the Earth and the Moon. It was taken by a 6-inch telescope Mr. Adamski took in the late 1940s. And this craft can be in dimension anywhere from 1,000 feet to several miles in length. And this craft here is the same type of craft as you see in the picture above, but you can see the outline of the hull itself. And this is in orbit in the Earth's atmosphere. And here is another craft around the moon, and you can see it's trailing behind it the several other craft in sequence as it's around lunar orbit. And here we have another shot around the moon, and you have here half a dozen craft in formation flying along the surface of the moon.
In early March of 1951, through his 6-inch telescope, George Adamski was able to photograph a remarkable series of 4 photos as the large carrier-type craft was releasing 6 scout craft.
And basically this craft is what we would call a miniature city. It is in an environment that is enclosed to itself, and these bell-shaped craft, like our aircraft on an aircraft carrier, are housed in this cigar-shaped craft, and so this is used for distance travel through long distances of space.
The bright glowing effect of the craft is a result of natural particles in space coming into contact with the resonant field generated by the craft. This effect can also bend the light waves entirely around the craft, causing it to disappear from view.
What we have here is a picture of the bell-shaped, the scout-shaped craft with the 3-ball condensers underneath it. The condensers are a means in which the polarity, the electromagnetic polarity, can be shifted direction, and it's set up triangularly, so by shifting polarity from this angle to this angle, the craft maneuvers in a 3-dimensional field. And around the outside of the cabin area, there are 3 sets of 4 portholes, or 12, and that is common to all the scout crafts that have been photographed anywhere in the world, whether they are Adamski photographs or not. The scout craft never touches the surface of the planet. In other words, when it comes down to land, even when the propulsion system is shut, what you and I would consider off, there's always a trickle charge going through, so it maintains several inches off the surface of the ground. So the 3 balls that you see underneath the saucer portion of it have nothing to do with landing pod, because the craft never rests on the ground. These are part of the propulsion system that help to direct the magnetic field and the magnetic flux underneath the craft. These craft operate on what we would call a pro-gravity field. They do not believe in fighting the principles and the forces of nature, because they are far too strong. What they do is they believe in blending harmoniously in with those forces. And it's very much like you can jump against a ocean current and swim and expand a lot of energy, or you can turn around and let it carry you where it's going. And they follow the currents of electromagnetic energy through space from planet for planet. And this is how they operate. Although George Adamski may be better known for his pictures of extraterrestrial spacecraft, he was far more concerned with letting people know that it wasn't just the existence of these craft that was important, but actually who was behind it and the reasons why these people come to visit us. And I think that is to a great extent lacking today. We hear so many stories of all types of interaction and contacts that are of a fearful or harmful or aggressive nature, and this is exactly contrary to what George Adamski spoke about and what his life work was really concerned with doing, and that was to educate people into the purpose behind these contacts and the reasons that they came to talk to us and the benefits that we as a civilization can derive from interactions with these extraterrestrials?
Well, I think I've always been interested in the possibility of extraterrestrials, and I think through my own work with meditation, spiritual investigations, I've come to the conclusion that one thing that all creatures in the universe share is consciousness. All beings, all living beings. We may be different, totally different biologically, I mean, but ants, amoebas, whatever, one thing we all share is that we are conscious creatures. The nature of our consciousness, what happens in our consciousness, may vary enormously, but that seems the common ground, the common bond between us and any other species there may be elsewhere in the universe. And I just, for the last few years, just been thinking a lot more about what's happening on this planet and seeing that the evolution of human consciousness has reached a crisis point, which goes along with the time when we have the potential to step out and start exploring the stars. And it seems to me that any species which gets this far has to take some sort of cosmic intelligence test, which says, are you really intelligent? Are you really wise enough to be able to use your technology for the good of the cosmos, rather than just for your own ego needs? And that's the test we're facing now. And if we fail that test, then I think we will wipe ourselves out or put ourselves back to the Stone Age or something like that. Conversely, if we get through this time and develop the capacity to begin to travel, whether it's materially or psychically, across space, we will have proven that we can move beyond this egocentric phase of consciousness. We will be, to all intents and purposes, saints, wise beings, whatever you want to call it. So conversely, I feel any species that has developed the ability to be in contact with us here, again, either physically, psychically, whatever, must have gone through that itself. It must have passed its own cosmic intelligence test, which means, as far as we are concerned, they must be the level of consciousness of angels or whatever. I think all the stuff about extraterrestrials being malevolent beings, they're coming here to zap us with ray guns, all that stuff is just a projection of our own fears, of our own ego, of our own warlike nature, which we've got to transcend. Any extraterrestrials must have transcended that, or they'd have wiped themselves out. So it seems to me that if we're going to consciously approach them, we need to do so on the level of consciousness, like we would approach some guru or angel or very wise spiritual beings. That's what I think they are, is wise spiritual beings relative to us.
Then at Tijuca Bar de Tijuca in Brazil, Ed Keffel took a remarkable set of pictures on 7 May 1952. Ed Kessel and Joe Martins, reporters from O Globo, a newspaper in Rio, had been sent to Tijuca Bar to photograph a groundbreaking ceremony for a new building or something. It was a political thing. And they were covering the event when, at about 4:30 in the afternoon, Martins spotted an object approaching at low level, and he thought it was an airplane at first because it looked like it. But it was too low. It was just a little above the wave tops when they saw it, and they stopped talking and stood looking at it, and they remarked on how low the airplane was, and Martin says, no, that's not an airplane, it's something else. Get your camera ready. And so Joe readied his camera and started shooting pictures. And he shot a series as it approached, passed over a rocky mount rising out of the surf there, over some trees along the beach there, and then out along a beach spit, where it turned up on its edge and rolled away like a coin rolling on the water as it departed. Now, the interesting thing about this series of pictures is they were newspaper reporters. There were a number of people there. There were politicians present. There were scores of witnesses. They took statements from many of them. All this was published in the local newspaper, or the Rio newspaper, on the front page. A few years later, after it had been reported and after original pictures had been obtained by APROBE through Irina Granchi down there in Brazil, one of the best-known UFO researchers there, got copies from the Brazilian Air Force before they shut it back down again, who first said that it was a real object, and after some persuasion on the part of our government, changed the story, tried to substitute something else, tried to kill the pictures, and things like that. Now, I say because this was a result of interference by agents from our government is because Dr. Olavo Fontes was present. He was an Air Force flight surgeon in the Brazilian Air Force, and he was present in the general's office when the American agents came to see him on orders from here, and offered all the reasons why this should be shut down, should be stopped. And the Brazilians tried to call them back. They tried to put out cover stories to change it, just like we did the crash at Roswell. Now here's an interesting set taken at Lake Chauvet near Clermont-Ferrand in France on the 18th of July in 1950. Now we're still in 1952, you see. And this is about 4:15 in the afternoon when Mr. Andre Fragnali, an engineer, took a series of 4 photographs of an object traveling from west to east in the sky over Lake Chauvet. He was there with a truck, and he had stopped his truck, and he got out and opened a lunch pail and was getting ready to eat a sandwich when he saw the objects approaching. And he saw that it was metallic. It was not an airplane. It was disc-shaped, reflecting the sun's rays from its edge. And it appeared lighter on the top and darker underneath, and it was completely silent. And he prepared his camera and started taking pictures. He took 4 good black and white pictures at fairly low level as it passed him, and then as it began to ascend over the lake, and then departed at a steep angle, leaving the scene. These 4 pictures are among the clearest ones taken at that time. And he even watched it with binoculars for part of the time. He used a good camera. He used a Z-Sycon 24 by 36 camera with a Tessar f/45 lens, which gave him sharp photographs that lent themselves to analysis even in those days. Another object or photo of interest came to attention in 1952, also 19th of July. No, we're still in 52. This is early in the thing here, at Puerto Maldonado on the border between Peru and Brazil. Officer Domingo Troncoso, a customs inspector for Peru at the border station there, was the only one that had a camera. When many people on the border station saw a cigar-shaped object passing from right to left across the sky, and it passed over the river that makes the boundary between Brazil and Peru at that point, and it was low enough to cast a reflection in the waters of the river. Judging from that, since you have the reflection in the water and the object in the sky, you can triangulate and get an approximate altitude or angle of elevation from the photographer. So he took the one picture as it moved along. It was moving from right to left rather slowly, about the speed of an airplane flying, and trailing what looked like a trail of thick white smoke from the back of it. When that trail of residue settled to the ground, it turned out to be a mass of thin, fibery threads like spider webs or flax. Today we call the same phenomena angel hair, from the angel hair you put around the bottom of a Christmas tree. And when this material has been analyzed, it has a composition something like that. It's made of boron, silicon, aluminum, and a number of other things that are present in the air that seem to be polymerized by some natural process in the either around or in the wake or in the exhaust of whatever propulsion device is using. It's a natural polymerization process that produces these fibers that are really strange fibers too, because there's been a number of them. Because they're tough, have good tensile strength if you use inert instruments to pull them apart. If you touch them with your fingers, they turn to jelly, and they break up easily. In fact, they'll collapse of their own weight. If you put some in the palm of your hand, it just, in time, from the heat of the palm of the hand, melts down into a jelly-like mass and then turns green and then evaporates away. But this stuff has come down all over the country in the wake of UFOs, even to the extent of falling inches deep in the wake of a UFO over an area that covers 15 or 20 city blocks. A case like that happened in Bakersfield, California. There was a case in England where a fall of angel hair covered the streets and sidewalks and roofs of a town 4 inches deep, the whole town. Another interesting one, still in 1952 now, 52 was a banner year, leading up probably to the big wave in France in 1953 and 54, but in late July of 1952, we began to experience overflights over Washington. The public has been told about one, but there was a buildup of this. They began about the 22nd or 23rd of July of 1952. The first objects appeared over Washington, passed through the prohibited airspace, flew on, and disappeared. Then, on the 27th of July, a flock of them appeared over Washington at night, like a half a dozen or more, that moved through the prohibited airspace in formation. They turned the searchlights on, they sent interceptors up, and the objects successfully eluded all attempts to get them on gun camera film. Then on the night of the 29th of July, we had a score of them appear over the Capitol, and they watched them on radar. They chased them with relays of fighters. Interceptors called up one after another. They ordered one F-102 to ram one if he could, and he put it in afterburner and tried to ram one that was in front of him, and it just flew circles around him, and as he was flying in afterburner past him, just circled him as fast as he could go. So there was a lot of activity going on there. And on that afternoon of the 29th of July, at about 4:30 in the afternoon at Passaic, New Jersey, just above Washington, Mr. George Stock and his old father were standing out in front of Stock's yard, his house there, where he repaired lawnmowers, and they spotted a strange aircraft approaching low over the trees in the distance to the east, I guess it was. And they watched it for a minute. They could see that it wasn't not an airplane, that it wasn't a balloon, it wasn't a helicopter, it wasn't anything identifiable. And George told his father, keep an eye on it, I'm going to go get the camera. And his dad stayed out there in the front there to keep an eye on it, and George came out in time to start taking pictures, and he snapped the first picture. I was still on its approach towards his house there. And then he rolled the film as it passed over their heads and started passing along the ridge line of their house. They could just see it above the ridge line. He got a second picture as it neared the ridge line, another one as it was near the far end of the roof line of the house, then one where it's out over the backyard passing away, and another one where it's moving farther away, and one more picture. They got a total of 6 pictures. Now they got them in the camera, and it was clearly nothing mundane. It was so low they could have thrown something, a rock, and hit it as it passed over them. So they discussed this, and by now a neighbor had joined them also, and they decided to take the camera and the roll of film to the local newspaper and tell them the story. So they took it to the Morning Call there. And the Morning Call newspaper photo lab took the film out of the camera, processed the film, made the prints, and printed the pictures on the front page of the Passaic Morning Call. By evening of the day they appeared in the newspaper, a man came to Stock's house identifying himself as a CIA agent, which is strange because the CIA is not supposed to be operating in the domestic borders of the United States. CIA jurisdiction is beyond the national borders, and FBI has a jurisdiction inside of the national borders. But we find the CIA meddling all over the place here, and I don't know how they get away with it or why they do it. But anyway, the man identified himself as a CIA officer, demanded the pictures. George refused to give them up, and finally, after some negotiation, the man agreed to settle for the negatives. He'd let George keep the pictures, and he wanted to have them take them someplace and have them tested, which George agreed to after the man provided a signed, written receipt for the documents with an address and telephone number that checked at the time. And he carried them away, and then when George tried to get them back, he tried repeatedly to get his negatives back, and there was always an excuse why they couldn't return them. This went on for 3 months. Finally, he got angry and got an attorney who was going to file a lawsuit against the office, and they returned 5 of the 6 negatives as copy prints, but they never returned the 6th one. And George has never been able to get it back. He now has passed on. The pictures went into the hands of August Roberts, who also has passed on, and now they're in my possession. But we've never found the 6th picture.
I think, whichever explanation we use is going to be a theory.
Yeah.
And theory is always different from reality. I mean, we can probably create, more than one theory about the phenomenon. But I think the least useful approach is to try to deal with this phenomenon in the context of Cartesian-Newtonian materialistic science, because there we have just the alternative. I mean, this is either a spaceship, a hardware, from another galaxy, or it is hallucination. It is a phenomenon, that suggests mental disease in the people who have seen it, or fraud or something in that category. And I think it's not difficult to realize that that's a fundamentally wrong approach. I mean, let's say if it were a spaceship, if it were really advanced technology, we know enough about the solar system. We know they will not be coming from the planets of the solar system. So the next possibility, is those are worlds that are light years away. So they would have to be using technology that we can't even imagine at this point. They would have to be either supraluminal speeds, I mean faster than light, or interdimensional. We have concepts like hyperspace, sort of technology that would be able to step out of this time-space continuum into hyperspace and then re-enter somewhere else. So if we would be dealing with this kind of technology, we couldn't ourselves distinguish those phenomena from hallucinations. I mean, this would be like bringing a helicopter and color television to the pygmies, or something like that. So that's not a very useful way of thinking about it.
Dr. Richard Haynes is a physiological psychologist who has conducted numerous research and development projects for NASA Ames Research Center in San Jose, California. One such project was the design of the Proximity Operations Research Mock-up, a spacecraft docking simulator, which will eventually assist Space Station Freedom astronauts in the docking of visiting spacecraft. Dr. Haynes' interest in the UFO phenomenon began some 30 years ago. Since then, he has published several books on the subject, most recently, Project Delta, a study of multiple UFO sightings.
I first got interested in the UFO subject back in the 60s when I was doing some research on rendezvous and docking for our space program. And I had a laboratory back then that would allow me to simulate the way objects look to the astronauts when they're in outer space. And so I began to discover rather quickly that under the right lighting conditions, I could fool ask the person to look at a target situation with a black background and very bright front illumination like we have in orbit. And the person was totally unable to describe what they were seeing. They would be inaccurate in terms of the object size and shape, its distance, of course, the basic characteristics were just very misunderstood and misinterpreted. And so this led me to think that, well, I could explain UFOs. As a skeptic, if I could do this in the laboratory, then these sightings must simply be unidentified natural phenomena. And so that's how I got started, because I set out to disprove that there were such things, because I could set them up in the laboratory and fool people pretty completely. Well, after a number of years of talking to very credible witnesses, including pilots of many kind of aircraft, I came to understand that I was wrong. That as a matter of fact, there is something very definitely here that's important, that deserves serious study, and that I could not explain. I've been asked a number of times how I go about analyzing a photograph of an anomalous phenomenon. Let's call it a UFO. Well, that's a good question, and it's a complex question with many levels of answers. And to make it simple, let me suggest that no single photograph that is unexplained is sufficient in itself to prove anything. And so what I like to do is take a look at the entire context in which a photograph finds itself. What do I mean by that? First of all, there's the photographer. And the photographer plays a very central role, not only in taking the photograph, but in presenting the photograph to someone else. Perhaps in providing the context information surrounding the photograph. In addition to the photographer, then you have the camera. The condition of the camera. Was it malfunctioning? How current is it in terms of its ability to take automatic exposures rather than manual exposures? You have the film that's in the camera. Is that film state-of-the-art? Was it properly chosen for the conditions, let's say the nighttime sky? This says something about not only the film and the camera, but the cameraman's ability to use proper judgment. In addition, you have the development of the film. Who did the developing? What safeguards were taken to prevent double exposures in the development process? Assuming now that the camera did not malfunction, and assuming the cameraman was not trying to carry out a hoax, and so forth. In addition to that, then you have now the developed negative. What about the processing, the enlargements, for instance? Can we what's called dodge in or double expose a disc-like image on a rather prosaic background? Finally, you have the whole story that surrounds the time and the place the camera and the photographer and the film find themselves. And does that story match up with what's on the film? And when you take all of those events together and you examine each one carefully, and then you subject the image on the negative, the original negative, to certain special processing. Let's call them photo enhancements for now. And you find no ambiguities, and you find no contradictions. You've got something. You've got a real photograph which can stand the test of time, and which is then at the stage of going to the next step, which is trying to match up that image on the photograph with known phenomenon, first of all. After you have exhausted all known phenomenon, only then do you progress to unknown or hypothetical phenomenon, postulated phenomenon, such as UFO, such as extraterrestrial craft, for instance. But I don't advocate doing that until I have exhausted all prosaic explanations. Over the years of looking at this phenomenon, I have studied quite a few photographs which just cannot be explained by prosaic explanations. And the reason why they can't be explained so readily is, again, where they were taken and when they were taken and the conditions under which they were taken. That's as important as the shape of the object that's seen. So, for instance, Jacques Vallée and I have analyzed a very interesting photograph from Costa Rica, taken from an airplane, looking straight down The airplane was at 10,000 feet altitude, and the background of this object is a lake. And so the object, or whatever it is hovering over the surface of a lake. And by knowing the optics of the camera, the focal length, and so forth, we know the angular width of the object. We know its absolute distance. It can't be more than 10,000 feet. So we were able to calculate the size of this object. And what we find, based upon our analyses, is, I think, clearly a three-dimensional object, not a flat or two-plane object, with some very interesting symmetry in the surface structure, or the surface reflections, let's call it. In addition to that, I find two edges which are very smooth and continuous and parallel to each other, which think of a penny kind of seen at an angle. The two sides of the edges are rather smooth, relative, and parallel to each other. On the other hand, at the far side, I find a very undulating and irregular edge, which is very intriguing. It raises some interesting questions, and it suggests that the object, whatever it is, may possibly be submerged into the water. This actually may represent the wave border or boundary, as the object is at an angle to the water surface. The object is anomalous in that case, first of all, because there is no known, no visible means of propulsion or lift in this case. The second case, the second point is that we have a photograph taken 20 seconds before it and 20 seconds after it by an automatic camera with nobody looking at the camera. It's just doing its own exposures automatically. The object is not visible in the previous or the following, which tells us something that the object had to be appearing within that 20-second period and then disappearing after it. Well, that's anomalous. Airplanes don't do that. So we were able to calculate that if the object entered linearly and flew across the camera field of view, how fast would it have to travel in order to show up just in the middle frame? And the answer is in almost 1,000 miles an hour. The object had to be very big if it was far away, and on the order of 800 to 1,000 feet across, which makes it anomalous. Another explanation would be that it's a smaller object closer to the airplane. Nobody on board the airplane saw this. It was about 5 men on board the airplane doing a routine mapping. Well, that's just one example of a disc-shaped three-dimensional object reflecting sunlight realistically under following the laws of optics reflection, let's say, where the object just cannot be explained as an airplane or a kite or a frisbee or some model of some sort or a balloon or many oars. And after exploring all these options and doing the analysis, we're left with a UFO, an unidentified flying object. Well, in this particular case from British Columbia, here's a color blow-up of what the Mrs. D.R. obtained with her Mamiya camera. And it was a beautiful morning, a clear day with a few clouds in the sky, and she's taking a picture of this mountaintop right here in order to prove to her husband that she could take a good quality photograph. He'd been kidding her about this. She did not notice, nor did anyone else, a very interesting shaped object up here in the sky until she got the film back from the processor. I found out from a geometric analysis that the tip of the mountaintop was very, very close to the optical center of the frame, which would back up the photographer's statement that she was taking a picture of the mountain. I think that if she had seen the UFO and in fact was trying to perpetrate a hoax, she would have centered the object more in the center of the field. I have another drawing here which is a reconstruction of the object as seen from the side, showing elevation angles and sun angles and so forth. And This analysis matches very nicely the locations of the solar reflections off the surface of the body of the craft or whatever it is. And finally, we have the certified land survey that we did at site. The mountaintop was 7,580 feet from the viewing location, with an elevation above the local horizon of a little over 24 degrees. These are all, I think, important points to be made when analyzing this particular case. Finally, I have an enlarged digital enhancement of the object showing rather large pixel groupings, and we can see the reflection off of a protrusion on the top of the object, as well as a bright solar reflection off of the front edge of the object as well. I've spent a good deal of time looking at this case, and it is fascinating for what the object could be. We know what it's not. It deserves a lot of serious study by qualified people. The negative's available if anybody wants to do more work on it. Here's a good example where we have a couple who has no particular motives for hoaxing this sort of thing, have not made any money off of it, and yet they're willing to share the negative for further analysis. In this next case, I have 3 black and white photographs taken in Tiraspol, Russia, on April 20th of 1990, between 6:10 and 6:30 local time, p.m. 3 teenage boys this is a Moldavian Republic of the SSR at that time. 3 teenage boys were out skateboarding, and it was about time to go home for dinner. One of them had a camera with him, a Zenit Model E with black and white ASA 250 film, speed film in it, and a very interesting dome object shows up in the sky. The sky is fairly foggy and diffuse, and I received this case from an investigator in Tiraspol who asked me to analyze it. Well, he provided a drawing that I have here showing the estimated flight path of the object as seen from above, and then we see each of the 3 photographs enlarged of the object. The object appears to be the same object in terms of its length-width ratio and other characteristics. It's a very interesting case which again proves that UFOs are being photographed in foreign countries, and there's a lot of evidence from around the world actually on this subject. A very interesting UFO event happened in Belgium over a number of months with literally thousands of eyewitnesses on the ground. This case involved photographs, it involved radar, it involved military jet intercepts, and a highly credible analysis, photographic analysis of a 35mm photograph that was taken from the ground, a nighttime shot, of what appears to be a triangular airform with very bright lights, one at each corner of the triangle, and then a orange-red light pretty much at the center of the object as well. 2 books have been published by the UFO group in Belgium, in Brussels, documenting a great deal of the evidence, including eyewitness drawings and photographs and so forth, other evidence. This object was tracked at very high speed by the official military authorities, the Air Force. As a matter of fact, one of the leading Air Force officers at the time acknowledged that he could not explain what this phenomenon was. It remains unidentified. To me, one of the fascinating and valuable aspects of this Belgian case from 1989 was that when the private investigators, the UFO investigators in Brussels, went to the military officials the officials were ready and willing and able to cooperate. And if we can find this level of cooperation in Belgium, we should be able to find this level of cooperation in America. So once again, we have a foreign case, highly credible witnesses, photographic evidence, radar evidence, visual evidence, all correlating to the same space and time. I don't know what more evidence a scientist would want to take a look at. And to claim that there's no photograph or there's no physical evidence is just, that's not true. To automatically exclude verbal testimony, as some people would like to do in this case, might be convenient to avoid looking at the evidence. On the other hand, verbal evidence is oftentimes used in courts of law to bring people to justice. And why that level of proof is not adequate in this domain, UFO studies, I don't understand, except perhaps on one basis, and that would be a simple denial mechanism. That perhaps as a culture, as a species, we are in denial about this phenomenon. Evidence, as I said earlier, of a photographic nature is not sufficient in itself. But when we take a look at this photographic evidence in combination with the narrative, with the social situation that surrounds it, with the knowledge of the camera, the film, the processing, and so forth and so on, we are in a much stronger position to say that the evidence is compelling and is suggestive. And I again urge my colleagues from many points of view, many academic disciplines, to take a look at the evidence, come to your own conclusions, rather than just accepting the conclusions of other people.
The mere existence of alien spacecraft should not be considered a matter of national security. Matter of fact, at the point we're now at, it's a matter of national insecurity that the government feels it has to lie to its citizens.
I'm sympathetic to the view expressed by Dr. John Mack that perhaps this phenomenon, whatever it represents, is meant to break us out of that paradigm, to make us think in other ways. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. That rings sort of true. I don't know how to proceed any other way than as a journalist would proceed, however, and that is going after the documents, trying to find witnesses. I suspect that for this thing to ever answer itself, for us to really get a firm grip on what really is going on, it'll take one of two things. One is somebody from the inside with impeccable credentials who clearly was in a position to know, who comes forward and spills the beans and can show us those beans. That's number one. Or number two, the visitors themselves, wherever they're from, wherever they're here, make a demonstration of some sort. We joke about them landing on the White House lawn. Well, that would work. That would do it. Land in a craft in which we could kick the tires and we can clearly see that these are beings from somewhere else. Whitley Strieber said it years ago. He said, these beings are the true architects of the secrecy. They could break this open anytime they want to. They choose not to for whatever reason.
T-minus 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7. Go for main engine start. 3 main engines up and burning. 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery and the Upper Atmosphere Research Satellite, beginning a new era studying the Earth's environment from space.
Roger, roll, Discovery. Mission Control Houston now controlling the flight of Discovery.
On September 15, 1991, the Space Shuttle Discovery captured on videotape several anomalous objects moving in unusual trajectories. 4 NASA scientists were asked to look at the footage, concluding, "The objects seen are orbiter-generated debris illuminated by the sun. The flicker of light is the result of firing of the attitude thrusters on the orbiter, and the abrupt motions of the particles result from the impact of gas jets from the thrusters." To illustrate the sequence of events, the flash is the thruster firing. The abrupt change in direction of the particles are a result of the gas jet which accelerates the debris. Dr. Jack Kasher, a physicist at the University of Nebraska, has recently completed an exhaustive analysis of the event.
What I'm going to tell you is the result of my analysis as a physicist and a scientist, just taking the data and seeing where it goes. And the bottom line of my investigation is I started out my investigation assuming that there were ice particles and trying along the way to prove that there were ice particles. And I found out that, at least if you take the data that I've got and the analysis that I've gotten, that I've done of it, that's a completely untenable position. The camera was focused at infinity, and any little specks would just be invisible. And you can tell that's true because toward the end of the segment, the camera pans down and looks at the side of the cargo bay, and you can see it's grossly out of focus. Then it focuses and then turns toward the front. So it was focused at infinity, so any little particles near the camera don't work. Ice particles don't work. And after that, there aren't many options. Meteors, absolutely not. They don't change direction. And space junk, and satellites don't change direction. There are no other options. These are objects that are clearly at times above the air glow, and so they're maneuvering, and they are in outer space. Therefore, they're spacecraft. I don't see any other interpretation that you can have. They are some kind of spacecraft.
At the time this event was recorded, the shuttle was northwest of Australia, moving southeast into the sun. Here is the camera view from the shuttle just prior to the event. What appears to be the horizon is actually the top of the Earth's air glow. The Earth's physical horizon is located about 60 miles below the top of the air glow. Here you see the changes of direction of several of the objects after the flash. The main object will appear moving to the left, followed shortly by a flash, at which time the objects abruptly change direction, followed by two streaks. This is a close-up of the same sequence, screen right, showing several objects at the time of the flash. Note the regular pulsations of the objects, which is inconsistent with tumbling ice particles. Shortly after, the camera pans down to the shuttle bay. The jerkiness is a result of the camera movement. Note this object, when silhouetted, appears to have the shape of a domed disc. Later in the mission, this object shot through the upper corner of the frame. Enlarged and slowed down, it also appears to be disc-shaped with a regular pulsation. First, a simple observation. If the particles are accelerated by a blast from the attitude adjustment thrusters, then it would follow that the camera, which is attached to the shuttle, would register the change in attitude of the shuttle. Dr. Kasher has calculated the change would be about 6 degrees. However, no change in the camera frame occurs throughout the entire sequence. Another simple observation is if the abrupt motions of the particles result from the impact of gas jets from the thrusters, then the trajectories of the objects should trace back to the source of the acceleration on the shuttle. As shown in this illustration, that is not the case. This is a graph of the main object's movement over time. The short downward section here indicates that the object is moving to the left in the frame. The upward section indicates that the object has changed direction and is moving to the right in the frame. This area, which corresponds to the flash, indicates that the object has stopped dead in its tracks for a full half-second.
Now, you tell me how this could work. If it's an ice particle, it's somewhere up about here. And I can prove, using the methods that I just pointed out, that before the flash, before the pre-flash, it's moving like this, in this direction. And the reason it stops, then, has to be that something is pushing back in this direction. Obviously, that can't be the shuttle. So the pre-flash explanation doesn't work. The reason that object, whatever it is, stops is not one of the attitude adjuster rockets. So we have a tremendous problem because it stops right at or just before the main flash. And it simply can't do that if it's an ice particle.
Finally, Dr. Kasher has calculated the velocity of the main object and compared this to the known velocity of the thruster aboard the shuttle. For example, if the object is an ice particle, we can easily determine it to be 65 feet from the shuttle. At the flash, the object stops for a full half-second before accelerating in a different direction. If the flash is the thruster firing, then the gas jet takes a half-second to reach the object and begin to accelerate it. We therefore multiply distance with time to arrive at the exhaust velocity of the thruster, which should compare to the known velocity supplied by NASA of 8,400 feet per second. Yet these two figures are not even close to each other. To illustrate this another way, in order for this sequence to work, the object would have to be 22 miles from the shuttle. Knowing the direction that the object is accelerated, the thruster would have to be 15 miles from the shuttle, which clearly cannot be the case.
So what does this all come down to? I've really tried to do a genuine, honest scientific inquiry into this. The reason I did it, of course, is because I didn't think the objects would end up being ice particles, and that implies that they are spacecraft, which would be a very important thing. But I tried to be fair in what I did, and I didn't push my conclusions, and at times it got to the point where I thought I would have to drop the whole thing because I got to points where I thought it was going to fall apart. It did not fall apart, and you've seen the analysis. There really is virtually nothing that supports the ice particle theory from the data that I have that have subjected to the analysis. And there are, on the other side of the coin, at least 5 proofs that the objects were not ice particles, therefore spacecraft. And they were either extraterrestrial or terrestrial, obviously. That's the dichotomy that we have. And if they were terrestrial, that implies a whole new level of technology that's levels and levels beyond anything that we have on this Earth. You saw some of those accelerations that we discussed, tremendous accelerations that would flatten any human pilot far beyond the capability of any craft that we have. So whether they're terrestrial or extraterrestrial, they're far beyond conventional programs. If they're terrestrial, that implies that we've been working on them for decades. Also implies that the Star Wars program is, I guess you might say, a sham, because we already have craft that are far beyond what we expected with Star Wars, and so that's been all kind of a waste of money. If they're extraterrestrial, it's really big news. We're being visited by other planets. It's also scary because those streaks that went through there, you can interpret those as well as I can. One possible explanation is that we were firing at them. That's a scary scenario. And so, once again, my analysis is a scientific one that at least satisfies me that those objects were not ice particles. And beyond that, we're all in the same boat together because we're speculating, and I have no evidence to prove what one was or the other, or whether one explanation works or the other, but it opens up the door, it opens up the can of worms to discussing some of these questions.
It tells me that there is a phenomenon, that there are extraterrestrials here beyond all shadow of a doubt in my mind. And I have other evidence at the same time. So this is corroborative evidence to more empirical evidence that I run into occasionally. And it simply tells me that somebody else is here. Now, the other thing that stands out in my mind is, and this comes up frequently when I'm lecturing someplace, they say, well, who are they and where do they come from? Well, the problem there is it's not a simple they, it's very complex, and it's not a few theys, it's literally thousands of them coming from on 1,000 different kinds of business, using 1,000 different kinds of craft. They're all generally disc-shaped, but they're all different in detailed construction, materials, operation, behavior, everything is infinitely different. Even the beings aboard, even though a third of them are humans, placental humans like us, within that third, there's infinite differentiation, difference in skin color, difference in size of the nose, size of the eyes, morphology, shape of the face, muscle, things, all kinds of things can be different. And the same thing with the grapes. There's infinite variation there. And they all, unless they're identical, they are all probably coming from someplace, from different places. They're here on different business. They have different kinds of propulsion systems. Some of them carry fuel of some kind, like little pellets, and some of them don't carry any fuel at all. They harvest their energy from the space around them, wherever they happen to be. And those all are technology we haven't even approached yet. We don't know how to operate a craft with no fuel. It gathers all of its energy from the ambient space around it as it goes. But others, thousands of others, have solved this technology. And that tells us another thing. It tells us we can do it. All we have to do is find out how we want to do it. And there may be a lot of different ways to do it because they're not all doing it the same way.